The clerk slid the metal back across the glass like it was a bottle cap and said, loud enough for the whole line to hear, "Ma'am, this is a replica. They sell these online for 20 bucks." I didn't correct him. I almost never do. What that boy behind the counter didn't know, what nobody in Chillicothe ever knew, was that my husband had finished the paperwork 2 years before he died. And paperwork outlives everybody. It outlived him. It was about to outlive a whole branch of his family. I was 71 years old that morning, standing at the repair counter at Mercer's Jewelry on Paint Street downtown, with 4 people in line behind me and a young man in front of me who had decided what I was before I opened my mouth. His name tag said Pruitt. He had the soft hands of somebody who'd never closed a wound or set a fence post. And he was holding the highest award this country gives, turning it over in his fingers like a poker chip. The place smelled of metal polish and watch oil. I kept my voice level. "I just need the clasp fixed," I said. "The ribbon's coming loose at the top. There's a dedication on Saturday." "Right, but I'm telling you, this isn't real." He smiled the way you smile at a child or a dog. "Real ones, you can't even buy. This is a costume piece. 20, 25 bucks, tops." Behind me, a woman shifted her weight. Somebody coughed. That particular quiet came up, the one a crowd makes when it's glad the embarrassment belongs to somebody else. I set my purse on the glass and took out the notebook. It's a small thing. Green cover gone soft at the corners, the spiral crushed flat on one end. I've carried one like it since 1969, since I learned to write fast and clean with one hand while the other held pressure on something that mattered. I clicked my pen. I wrote the date. I wrote the time, 10:41 in the morning. Then I wrote down what he'd said, word for word, in block letters, the way I write everything. I don't get loud, I get accurate. Pruitt watched me do it, and his smile got thinner. "What are you writing?" "What you said." I clicked the pen again. "Turn it over, please. Read me the back." He rolled his eyes, but he turned it. He held it up to the light and read it off flat and bored, the way you'd read the side of a cereal box. Raymond Earl Hatcher. A pause, and then a date under it. He squinted. Doesn't even match anything. Whatever. That date. I'd looked at it 1,000 times across 2 years and never once known what it meant. It wasn't the day of the action everyone in this county thought they knew. It wasn't our anniversary. It wasn't his birthday or mine. Ray had it engraved himself with his own money the year before he passed, and when I asked him why, he only said, "You'll know when you need to." I was still looking at that date when the man at the far end of the bench stopped moving. He was the manager. He'd been down at the other end the whole time, a jeweler's loop screwed into one eye, a wristwatch cracked open under a lamp. I hadn't paid him any mind, but he'd heard the name. He set the watch down. He took the loop out of his eye, slow, and laid it on the felt. He came up the bench and took the medal from Pruitt's hand without a word. He looked at the front. He turned it over and read the back to himself. Then he looked at me, and something left his face, and something harder and quieter took its place. He stepped back from the counter. He straightened up like a younger man, and he brought his right hand to his brow and held it there. Nobody in that line said anything, not one of them. He lowered his hand after a long moment and set the medal down on a black velvet pad, careful, like it might bruise. Then he turned to Pruitt, and his voice was very even. "Go in the back, son. Count the watch batteries. All of them. Don't come out till you're done." Pruitt went. The manager turned the pad toward me so the medal faced me, ribbon up. "I'll fix the clasp myself," he said. "No charge. It'll be ready Thursday." He stopped, and for a second the even voice wasn't quite even. "Ma'am, would you mind telling me how you're connected to this man?" "He was my husband," I said. He nodded slowly. like that answered something he'd been carrying a long time. Then I'm sorry for your loss, and it's an honor to have you in the store. Nobody had ever called it an honor to have me anywhere. His name was Marcus Webb. I'd learn the rest of it later, the 2 tours. The reason a retired Marine knew that name on sight and went still when he heard it. Right then, I only knew one thing. A stranger in a jewelry store on Paint Street had just done the one thing my husband's own family never would. He believed me before I said a word. Marcus Webb didn't salute a piece of metal. He saluted a name. And that name goes back 2 years, to a porch off Blacksmith Road, and the last real conversation I ever had with Ray. The Hatcher place sits about 4 miles out of town, past Yoktangi, down Blacksmith Road where the blacktop gives up and turns to gravel. 80-some acres, a barn that leans a little, a white house that has needed paint for 10 years. Ray's grandfather cleared that ground. Ray was born in the front bedroom. So was his father. It had been Hatcher land for 110 years, and not 1 foot of it ever belonged to me by blood. I married into it in 1973, and the town never once let me forget I'd married in. That's the thing about a small place. It decides who you are early, and it does not like to be corrected. To half the people I'd known for 50 years, I was the woman who claimed she'd been an army nurse. Claimed. Like it was a story I told. As if a person could fake the smell of a field hospital, or the weight of a stretcher, or the arithmetic of who you can save and who you can only sit beside. I never argued it. You cannot argue a town out of something it has decided. You can only outlast it. Ray never doubted me. He was the one man who had seen the same kind of things and come home quieter for them. He did not talk about his war, and I did not talk about mine. And that silence was the most honest part of a long marriage. He got sick the last year. I won't go into it. He went in his sleep, in February, in the bedroom that faces the fields. But the autumn before, when he still had his strength in the mornings, he called me out to the porch one evening and had me sit down beside him. The fields were going gold. There was wood smoke somewhere down the road. He had the medal in his lap, in its case, running his thumb over the back of it the way he did when he was working something out. "When I'm gone," he said, "the family is going to come for this place." I told him not to talk that way. "I'm not being dark, Lorraine. I'm being practical." He tapped the case. Dale, especially. He thinks blood means the farm is his. It isn't. And when he comes, he is going to come loud, and he is going to try to make you look like nothing in front of everybody. He closed the case and set it in my hands. I got the paperwork done. All of it. You won't have to fight anybody. When the family comes, you'll be ready. I asked him what paperwork, what he had done. He just smiled and patted my hand. It's already where it needs to be. That was the closest Ray Hatcher ever came to telling me he had seen the whole thing coming. He died 4 months later, and for 2 years, nothing happened. The family kept its distance. I kept the lights on. I started to think he'd just been a sick man worrying in the dark. I was wrong. He had been a careful man, finishing a job. The job came due 11 days before the dedication. It came certified mail, which out on Blacksmith Road means you drive into town to the post office and sign for it yourself, because the carrier won't leave it in the box. I went in on a Tuesday. I signed. I read it in the truck in the parking lot before I turned the key. It was from a law office up in Columbus on behalf of Dale Hatcher. It informed me that my nephew was contesting my husband's estate. He was asking the Ross County Probate Court to set aside Ray's will, remove me as executor, and fold the Blacksmith Road farm into the General Hatcher family holdings. There were phrases like undue influence and lack of capacity. There was a hearing date. I did not crumple it. I don't get loud. I get accurate. I read it twice. And then I opened the notebook on the seat beside me and started a clean page. Dale Hatcher was 44 years old and ran a grading and paving outfit out toward Bainbridge that had been dying slow for 3 years. Ray used to say Dale could lose money paving a road the state was already paying him to pave. After the funeral, Dale appointed himself head of the family, the way some men do when there's no one left who can tell them no. And he'd spent 2 years telling anyone who would listen that the farm should have gone to the blood, not the widow. But it was the next part of the letter that made me put the truck in park and read it a third time. His lawyer wrote that my claims of distinguished service and the decorations displayed in support of those claims would be shown at hearing to be fabricated or fraudulent. There it was, in a Columbus lawyer's careful print. Dale was not just going to say, I didn't deserve the farm. He was going to stand up in open court in front of half the county and call me a liar wearing medals I had never earned. He was going to call Ray's Medal of Honor a fake. And sitting there with the engine ticking, I understood he had already started. The ceremony Saturday was a VFW dedication, out at the post on Western Avenue, renaming the hall in Ray's honor. The whole town would turn out. Dale meant for that medal to be held up as a fraud right there, between the flags and the folding chairs, in the one room where Ray's name was finally supposed to mean something. He had a sinking business, a loud opinion, and a lawyer 2 hours up the road. I had a green notebook, a husband 2 years in the ground, and a medal with a broken clasp and a date on the back I could not explain. But a man does not hire a Columbus law firm to take a farm from a widow he could simply wait out. Dale was in a hurry. I did not yet understand why. I only knew that the speed of it felt wrong, the way a wound that should not be bleeding that fast feels wrong. What Dale didn't know was that Ray had already settled this 2 years ago, on paper. He just hadn't told me where to look. I started looking that night. The Hatcher house keeps what it knows in plain furniture. There were no safes, no hidden floorboards, no romance to any of it. Ray was a farmer and the son of a farmer, and a farmer's important papers live in a roll-top desk in the front room under a green-shaded lamp. In folders, he labeled himself in pencil. I turned the lamp on at 9 o'clock that night, and I did not turn it off until past 2 in the morning. I went through every slot in that desk. Seed receipts going back to the Carter years, the truck title, property tax stubs banded together by decade, his discharge papers, soft as cloth from handling, in a folder marked Army in his blocky hand. Warranty cards for a washer we'd already replaced twice. I found the deed to the farm, the old one, the warranty deed with his grandfather's name on it, and the legal description of all 86 acres written out in the long way they used to do it, by meets and bounds, by oak trees and stones that probably weren't there anymore. But that was the old deed. That only proved what everyone already knew, that the land was Hatcher land. It was not the paperwork Ray meant. A man does not sit you down on a porch and tell you he's protected you with a deed his grandfather signed. I sat back in his chair, the one that still held the shape of him, and I made myself think the way he thought. It's already where it needs to be. Not in the desk, not in the house. I'd been reading those words for 2 years as a comfort, the kind of thing a sick man says to settle a frightened wife. But Ray didn't waste words, not even kind ones. Where it needs to be. He meant somewhere it would hold, somewhere a thing is real because it's written down in front of the public, stamped, dated, and kept by the county whether anybody believes you or not. I found the thread at 1:30 in the back of the desk, in an envelope with nothing written on it. Inside was a single receipt, pale yellow carbon copy, the kind you get and forget. Across the top it read, Ross County Recorder. Below that, a line item, recording of instrument and a fee and a date stamped in faint purple ink. I held it under the lamp a long time. Ray had driven into Chillicothe, into the courthouse square, and paid to put something on the public record. And then he'd come home and said nothing, and run his thumb over the back of that medal, and waited. I clicked my pen. I opened the notebook to a clean page. I wrote the date off the receipt in block letters, the way I write everything, and I underlined it once. I didn't get loud about it. There was no one to be loud to. I just got it down, accurate, where I couldn't lose it. Then I did the other thing first, because it was the slower thing, and slow things have to be started early. I made coffee at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, and I filled out the form to request Ray's official record. I knew the form, Standard Form 180, the request you send to the National Personnel Record Center out in St. Louis, Missouri, when you need the government to tell you in writing what the government already knows. I'd filled one out for myself, years back, the one time I'd worked up the nerve to think anybody in this town might want proof, and then never sent it, because asking felt like agreeing I owed them an answer. This time I sent it. I printed Ray's full name in the box, Raymond Earl Hatcher, and his service number, and his dates, and in the line where it asks what you're requesting, I wrote, in clean capitals, complete record of decorations and awards, including citation. I wanted the paper that says it, the citation, with its own dry official language, signed in a chain that goes all the way up to one desk in Washington. Let them mail it to Blacksmith Road in an envelope with the seal on it. Let Dale's lawyer try to wave that away. I don't get loud. I get accurate. And accurate takes stamps and patience and 6 to 8 weeks, so I licked the envelope that night and had it in the box on the Yaktangi Road by first light. The recorder's office could not wait 6 weeks. The hearing wouldn't. I went into town the next morning. The Ross County Courthouse sits where it's always sat, square and gray with its clock tower, the heart of downtown Chillicothe, and the recorder's office is in the annex beside it, up a flight of worn marble steps that 50 years of farmers and lawyers and brides have hollowed down in the middle. It smelled like old paper and floor wax and the radiator heat they keep too high. There was a long oak counter, and behind it, a young woman with a cardigan and reading glasses pushed up in her hair. "Help you, ma'am? I need to see what's recorded against a piece of property," I said. "Out on Blacksmith Road, the Hatcher farm." She didn't blink at the name the way the town does. To her, it was just a parcel. She asked for the number, and I had it written in the notebook, because of course I did. And she went to a terminal and then to a back room and came out with a flat archival folder and a roll of microfilm, and she set me up at a reader by the window. "Take your time," she said. "Holler if the machine eats anything." I took my time. The chain of title on a piece of land reads like a family's whole life if you know how to follow it. Deeds, mortgages, releases, easements, every promise anybody ever made against that ground, in order, by date. I scrolled down through 110 years of Hatchers, the grandfather buying the back 40 in 1914, a mortgage in the 30s that nearly took the place, and the release a decade later that saved it. Ray's father's name, then Ray's, when the farm came to him. And then, near the bottom, recent, I found it. A deed of trust, recorded on the date from the yellow receipt. Grantor, Raymond Earl Hatcher. I leaned into the reader until my forehead nearly touched the glass, and I read every line of it twice. I am not a lawyer, and I will not pretend the language came easy. But the bones of it I understood, and the clerk confirmed the rest when I asked her plain. Ray had put the farm into a trust. He'd done it cleanly, while he was well, in front of a notary, and recorded it himself so it would sit on the public books for anybody to find. The land did not pass through his will at all, which meant it was not Ray's estate to fight over. which meant it was not something a probate judge could carve up and hand to the blood. It went where the trust said it went, and the trust said it went to me, to live on and keep for the rest of my life. "You'll be ready," he'd said. He had not been a frightened man rambling on a porch. He had been a man who'd already driven to town, climbed these same hollowed steps, and quietly put the whole thing beyond reach, and then come home and let me think there was nothing to do but love him while he went. 2 years I'd carried his words like a worry. They'd been a set of directions the whole time. I just hadn't known to read them. I sat back from the reader. My eyes had gone hot and I let them because the window was at my back and the clerk was busy and there was no one in that office to perform for. Then I clicked my pen and I wrote it down. Trust recorded. The date. The book and page numbers so I could ask for a certified copy. My hand was steady even when the rest of me wasn't, because the hand has its job and it does it. I should have stopped there. I had what I came for. I had what Ray died knowing I'd need. If I'd asked the clerk for my certified copies and walked back down those marble steps, I'd have had enough to walk into that hearing and keep my home. But I'm a nurse. When something looks wrong, you don't look away from it because the part that hurts is already handled. You find out how bad it is, and there was something on that film that didn't belong. Below Ray's trust, more recent still, was another instrument recorded against the same parcel, the same 86 acres, the same legal description, oaks and stones and all. A mortgage, not Ray's, not mine. I scrolled to it and made the machine hold it steady, and I read the grantor line 3 times to be sure my eyes weren't tired and lying. Grantor, Dale R. Hatcher. My nephew had borrowed money. A good deal of money by the figure printed there, from a commercial lender out of Columbus, a bridge loan, the short and expensive kind a man takes when the bank that knows him has already said no. And he had pledged the Blacksmith Road farm as collateral. He had signed papers swearing the land was his to pledge, and a lender 2 hours away who'd never set foot on Blacksmith Road had taken him at his word and wired him the money against 86 acres that were never, not for one day, his to give. I sat very still and let it come together, the way you let a hard diagnosis come together, piece laid against piece until the picture is the picture whether you like it or not. Dale had not come at me because he wanted the farm. Or not only. Dale had come at me because he had already spent the farm. He'd borrowed against ground he didn't own to keep that dying paving business breathing one more season. And the only way that loan was anything other than a crime was if the land truly belonged to the Hatcher blood and would land in his lap once the widow was pushed off it. The dates told the whole story without a word of help from me. Ray's trust, recorded first, clean and early and ironclad. Dale's mortgage, recorded after, against land the public record already said was tied up tight and going to me. He needed me gone. He needed the will broken and the trust ignored and the farm folded into the family the way he'd been telling everyone it should go. And he needed it fast, because a bridge loan comes due fast, and when it came due and the lender went looking for its collateral, somebody was going to pull this same roll of film and read these same lines in this same order. That was why the Columbus lawyer. That was why the hurry. That was why he meant to stand up Saturday at the VFW post on Western Avenue and call Ray's medal a fake in front of the whole county, and call me a liar in a dead man's uniform. It was never really about whether I'd earned anything. It was about burying the one set of papers that turned his loan from a loan into a fraud. If he could make me the con artist, nobody would think to wonder who'd really lied on a signature line. I scrolled back up to Ray's trust and looked at the recording date again. That date I'd just underlined twice in my notebook the night before. Something about it pulled at me. Some thread I couldn't follow yet. a feeling that I'd seen those exact numbers somewhere closer to home than a courthouse film reader. But Dale's mortgage was glowing on the screen in front of me, and it crowded everything else out, the way a bleeder will pull your hands away from every other wound in the room. I asked the clerk for certified copies, all of it, the trust, the mortgage, the whole chain, with the raised seal and her signature, the kind a court has to look at. Big stack, she said, totting it up. You doing some kind of title work? Something like that, I said. I paid her in cash from the snap pocket of my purse, and I wrote the receipt number in the notebook. And I carried that envelope down the hollowed marble steps and out into the cold square with both arms around it like it was groceries that might tip. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be plain about that, since people always expect the widow to feel something grand at a moment like this. I mostly felt tired, and underneath the tired, a low, steady anger that had nowhere to go yet. Dale had stood in church at Ray's funeral. Dale had carried one corner of the casket, and sometime after that, with Ray barely cold, he had taken the ground Ray's grandfather cleared and signed it over to strangers to cover his own bad math, and then decided the cleanest way out was to make a fool and a fraud of the woman Ray loved. The medal was still at Mercer's, on Paint Street, with Marcus Webb fixing its clasp for the dedication. The citation was somewhere in the mail between Chillicothe and St. Louis. The trust was certified in my arms. The pieces were moving toward each other now, all of them, and not one of them was moving the way Dale thought it was. He believed he was racing a slow old woman to a courtroom. He had no idea the record was already running, and that it had a 2-year head start, and that the man who'd set it running had thought of everything but the one small thing I still hadn't placed. That date, sitting quiet on 2 pieces of paper, waiting for me to set them side by side. The drive back out to Blacksmith Road took 20 minutes, and I do not remember a foot of it. I remember the envelope of certified copies riding on the seat beside me like a passenger I had to keep an eye on. And I remember the date. It would not leave me be. I had underlined it twice in block letters the night before, off that pale yellow receipt, and I had read it a third time on the microfilm with my forehead near against the glass, and underneath all of it sat a cold little certainty that I had seen those same numbers somewhere before Ray ever drove into Chillicothe to file anything. Somewhere closer than the courthouse, closer than the roll-top desk, in the house, on a thing I had held in my own 2 hands more times than I could count. I put supper on out of habit and never touched it. I sat at the kitchen table with the certified copies squared up in front of me and the notebook open at my elbow, and I went back through every page I had written since the morning at Mercer's, hunting the place I had set those numbers down before. They were not there. I had not written that date anywhere but off the deed, and still my thumb knew it. That was the part that turned me cold. My eyes were chasing the thing, but it was my right thumb that had the answer, the pad of it, the way your hand knows the latch on a screen door in the dark without your eyes having any say in the matter. I was at the sink, rinsing the cup when it came, and I set the cup down careful so I would not drop it. The back of the medal. For 2 years I had carried that medal in the top drawer of my dresser, wrapped in a square of flannel, and I had taken it out more nights than I will admit to and held it in the dark and run my thumb across the back of it, the way you'd worry a stone smooth. Ray's name is engraved there, Raymond Earl Hatcher, in the small even letters the government uses. I knew those by heart. But under his name there is a second line, a shorter one. A string of numbers I had felt 1,000 times and never once truly read, because I had told myself it was a service date or an issue date, some bit of official bookkeeping the army stamps onto a man when they hang a thing around his neck. I had felt it so many times it had stopped being numbers at all. It had just become the texture of the back of the metal, the roughness under the smooth. I stood at that sink a long while because I could not check it. The metal was not in my dresser. The metal was on Paint Street, behind the counter at Mercer's, where Marcus Webb had it open on a felt tray with the clasp in pieces, getting it sound for the dedication. I had carried it in there myself the morning the young fellow at the counter called it a $20 fake. The very date I needed was 2 hours of darkness and one drive away, engraved on the back of the one thing I could not get my hands on until the shop opened. I did not sleep much. I was on Paint Street before Webb had the lights all the way on, standing at the glass door with my breath fogging it and the envelope of certified copies hugged up against my coat. He came and turned the bolt and let me in without a word about the hour. Marcus Webb is a broad, slow-moving man, gray at the temples, with the kind of stillness about him that I have only ever seen in men who carried something heavy a long time ago and set it down on purpose. He had been a Marine. He had told me that much the first morning, after he stepped out from behind that boy at the counter and went quiet and stepped back and brought his hand up, and the whole line went silent watching a stranger salute a piece of glass. "You're early, Mrs. Hatcher," he said, not unkind. "It's not but done. Clasp set. I was going to give it a polish this morning." "I need to see the back of it," I said. "Right now, if it's no trouble." He looked at me a second, then he went and got the felt tray from the safe in the back and set it on the counter under the good light, and he laid the metal out on it. The ribbon had been pressed. The clasp sat new and tight where the old one had worn through. He turned it over for me with 2 fingers, gentle, the way you'd turn something living, and he stepped back to give me the light. I got my reading glasses down off my hair. I leaned in. Raymond Earl Hatcher, in those small, even letters, and under it, the second line, the line I had felt 1,000 nights and never read. I read it now. I read it the way you read a lab value you have been dreading. Slow, one figure at a time, making each one true before you let yourself go on to the next. It was the date off the deed. Not close to it. Not the same year, the same season. The date. The day Ray drove these same streets and climbed those hollowed marble steps in the annex by the courthouse and put the Blacksmith Road farm into a trust beyond his family's reach and paid his fee and came home and said nothing. He had taken that date, the most private thing he ever did, the quiet act that would keep me in my own house after he was gone, and he had carried it down to Paint Street and had it cut into the back of the highest thing his country ever gave him, right under his own name, where it would ride against my thumb in the dark for the rest of my life. A man does not do that by accident. A man does that because he means for you to find it. I had to put my hand flat on the counter. "Mr. Webb," I said, and my voice did not come out the way I wanted it to. "Do you know who put this second line on here?" And Marcus Webb was quiet a moment, and then he said, "I did." I looked up at him. "2 years ago, near enough," he said. "Maybe a little more. A man came in, older fella, tall, real plain-spoken. Had this with him in a flannel cloth just like you carry it. Set it on the counter and said he wanted a date put under his name. Didn't say why. I asked him did he want anything else. Words. You know, some men want a sentiment. And he said no. Just the date. He paid cash and he waited right there while I did it. Watched my hands the whole time, and when I gave it back, he looked at it a good while." Webb's jaw worked. I didn't know the name then. Didn't think a thing of it. Just a quiet old farmer wanting a date on a keepsake. It wasn't till that boy slid it back across my counter and called it a fake, and I read it out loud that it landed on me whose it was and what it was, and that I'd had it open in my own 2 hands once already and never known. That's why I had to step back, ma'am. It wasn't just the name. It was that I'd held it before and let it walk out my door not knowing. He reached under the counter then and brought up something flat, an envelope, the cheap kind out of a drugstore box, soft at the corners from sitting somewhere a long time. My name was on the front in pencil, in Ray's blocky hand, the same hand that wrote Army on the folder in the desk. Lorraine. He left this, Webb said. Told me hold it for the woman who'd bring the medal back in someday to get the clasp fixed. Said the clasp was already going and she'd be in eventually. He knew her. She'd not let it stay broke. His voice had gone rough. Said don't mail it. Don't chase her down. Just keep it by till she comes on her own. I'll be honest with you. I half forgot it was back there. 2 years is a long time to hold a thing for a stranger. Then you walked in that first morning with it wrapped in that cloth, and I knew before I even got it open whose hand was going to be on that envelope. I did not open it at the counter. I want to tell you I was brave about it, and I was not. I could not have read Ray's writing standing up in a shop on Paint Street, with the morning traffic going by on the other side of the glass. I put the envelope inside my coat, against me, and I asked Marcus Webb to finish his polish and have the medal ready for the dedication. And he said he would, and he set it back on the felt like it was made of eggshell. I read it that night, at the kitchen table, under Ray's green lamp, which is the only place it should have been read. I will not give you all of it. Some of what a man writes his wife to read after he is gone is for her and not for a county. But the bones of it I can tell you. He wrote that he knew his people. He wrote that Dale would come, that Dale had been circling the place with that look in his eye for a year already, and that money had a way of turning a nephew into something you didn't raise. He wrote that he had taken care of it where it would hold, in front of the public, stamped and dated, and that the date was on the medal so that I would always have it on me and never have to go looking far. The medal is the map, he wrote. You keep the map close and the rest is already done. And then he wrote the line he had said to me on the porch with his thumb moving on the back of that same medal. The line I had carried 2 years like a worry instead of a set of directions. When the family comes, you'll be ready. I sat with that a long time. Then I clicked my pen, and I wrote in the notebook, in block letters, the date and the hour, and the words note recovered, and under that, medal date confirmed, matches recording. My hand was steady. The hand has its job. The citation came that same week, in an envelope with the seal on it, just like I had wanted, mailed all the way from the National Personnel Record Center in St. Louis to a box on a gravel road outside Yoktanji. The government told me in writing what the government already knew. Ray's full name, his decorations, and the citation itself, the dry official language of it, the chain of signatures running up and up. I read every word of it standing at the mailbox in the cold, and then I drove it home and set it in the folder with the certified copies of the trust and the certified copies of Dale's mortgage, and the whole stack had begun to have a weight to it that was about more than paper. Marcus Webb called me 2 evenings before the hearing. He had heard things, the way you hear things in a town the size of Chillicothe. He knew Dale meant to stand up at the Ross County probate court and have his Columbus lawyer call my marriage a fiction and Ray's medal a fraud, and me a woman who had dressed herself up in a dead man's honors. And Marcus Webb, who had carried something heavy once and set it down, was angry on my behalf in the low way that kind of man gets angry. I authenticated that medal, he said. I'll swear to it anywhere they want me to. But Mrs. Hatcher, you don't have to wait on a courtroom. I know how lenders work. One phone call to that outfit in Columbus. You tell them the collateral on their bridge loan was never the man's to pledge. And you send them what you pulled off that film, and Dale Hatcher is finished by Friday. Quiet. Before he ever gets to stand up in front of those people and say one word about you, you want, I'll dial it myself. It was a kindness, and I knew it for one. And I will not pretend the thought of it had no pull. There is a version of me that wanted Dale to get the call cold, at his kitchen table, with no warning and no audience, the way he had wanted me pushed off my own porch. No, I said. Thank you. But no. You sure? He said. A thing done quiet can be undone quiet, I said. If I knock his legs out with a phone call, it's my word and a folder against his, and he spends the rest of his life telling this town the widow ruined him out of spite. I don't want it done in the dark, Mr. Webb. I want it done where it's written down and stamped and a judge has put his name to it, where nobody can ever sand it off later. I want it on the record. The record outlasts everybody in that room. I heard myself say the thing I had been saying my whole life, to nurses and doctors, and once to a colonel who did not like the chart I had kept. I don't get loud. I get accurate. Saturday I'll be accurate in front of all of them. He was quiet a second on the line. Then he said, Ray married right. I did not trust myself to answer that, so I thanked him and said I would see him at the courthouse. And I hung up the phone and sat in the dark kitchen with the folder in front of me and the medal back in its flannel in the top drawer. The clasp mended now, the date riding under Ray's name where it had ridden all along. 2 nights stood between me and that courtroom. I squared the papers. I checked the order of them twice, and I let myself think just for a moment about a tall, plain-spoken man standing at a counter on Paint Street, watching a stranger's hands cut a date into metal, telling no one why, trusting that someday the right thumb would find it. Saturday came in gray and low, the kind of South Ohio morning where the fog lies in the bottoms along the Scioto and does not burn off till near noon. The Ross County Probate Court keeps its rooms on the 2nd floor of the old stone building downtown, and the radiators in there knock and hiss like something penned up that wants out. I got there early, the way I have gotten everywhere early my whole life, and I took the hard bench on the right with my folder squared on my knees and the notebook laid on top of it, and I let the room fill in behind me without once turning my head. I did not need to turn my head. I could hear them. The Hatchers came in a clump the way that family always traveled, the cousins and the in-laws, and the 2 old aunts who had spent 40 years deciding I was a thing Ray made up to keep himself company. And they took the whole left side of the gallery and settled in with that low Sunday murmur people use when they have driven in to watch somebody get cut down to size. Dale sat up at the petitioner's table in a gray suit I had never once seen on him, a suit bought for the morning, and beside him his man from Columbus laid a soft leather folder square on the table and rested his hand flat on top of it like the table already belonged to him. My own attorney was a careful local man named Sam Pruitt, gray and unhurried, who had read every page in my folder twice and told me he had never in 30 years seen a record assembled so clean. He sat down next to me and patted the folder once and said nothing, which I appreciated. Behind us, 3 rows back, Marcus Webb sat in a pressed shirt with his hands folded and his back straight, and the flannel cloth folded in his coat pocket where the medal would have been if I had not been wearing it under my collar against my heart. The judge came in, a square, unsmiling woman with reading glasses pushed up in her hair, and she let the Columbus lawyer go first. He stood, and he was smooth about it. He spoke of the late Raymond Earl Hatcher with a great show of respect, and then he set about taking everything that man was apart. He said the estate ought to be opened and set aside for the proper Hatcher heirs. He said the woman now claiming to be the widow had produced, and here he paused, certain documents and certain decorations whose origins, he said, would not survive a serious look. He said it gently, which was the cruelest way he could have said it. A Medal of Honor, he told the court, is not a thing one keeps in a dresser drawer wrapped in a rag. He said there were reproductions of such medals sold over the internet for the price of a tank of gas. He said my marriage to Ray was a convenience at best and a fiction at worst, and that a careful court would not hand a working family's land to a woman who had dressed herself in a dead man's glory. The aunts behind me made a small, satisfied sound, all together, the way hens do. I wrote it down. I had my pen out, and I logged the hour at the top of the page, and I set down the words in the small, even block letters that 50 years of charts had put into my hand. The man's claims, one line at a time, the way you note a doctor's orders you intend to outlive. Dale watched me do it from the table. He had watched the young fellow at his counter do it too, that first morning at Mercer's, and he had smirked then. He did not smirk now. Something about the steadiness of a pen in an old woman's hand had started to bother him. When it was our turn, Sam Pruitt did not argue about the medal. He called Marcus Webb. Webb went up and was sworn, and he sat with his big hands on his knees, and he told the court plainly what he was, a master jeweler 26 years on Paint Street, and a Marine before that. He said he had examined the medal in question under glass. He said it was no reproduction, that the die work and the medal and the maker's marks were exactly what they were supposed to be, and that he would stake his license on it. Then Sam asked him to read what was engraved on the back, and Webb took his time, and in that knocking, hissing room he read out Raymond Earl Hatcher in a voice that did not hurry, and under it the second line, the date, slow, one figure at a time. And he said, looking not at the lawyer but straight across at me, that a man had walked into his shop a little over 2 years ago and paid cash to have that exact date cut under his own name, and had stood and watched him do it, and had said only that someday a woman would bring it back in to mend the clasp. The Columbus lawyer said that was a touching story, but a date was only a date. That was the moment Sam Pruitt slid the first certified copy across to the clerk and asked that it be read into the record. It was the deed of trust recorded down in the courthouse annex by Ray's own hand, and the clerk read the operative clause aloud in a flat county voice, the legal words that put the Blacksmith Road farm into a trust held beyond the reach of the Hatcher heirs, in perpetuity, for the benefit and residence of his wife Lorraine for the remainder of her natural life. And then the clerk read the date of recording. It was the same string of numbers Webb had just read off the back of the medal. Not near it. The same. The clerk read them twice because the judge asked her to, and the second time the room went quiet in a different way than the aunts had been quiet. A held quiet. The quiet of people doing arithmetic they had not expected to do. You may think you already see how this fell. You do not see all of it yet. Because Sam Pruitt did not stop there. He reached into Dale's own filing. When Dale moved to break the estate, his Columbus man had attached an exhibit to prove Dale was the farm's rightful steward, a financing commitment, a bridge loan out of a lender in Columbus, secured, the paper said in its own black letters, against the Hatcher farm on Blacksmith Road. It was meant to show the court that Dale had skin in the land, that he had put real money behind it. Sam laid that exhibit down beside the recorded trust and asked the court to compare the two dates. Ray had recorded the farm into trust first. Dale had pledged it as his own collateral after, more than a year after, against land that by then was no more his to borrow against than the courthouse steps. The weapon Dale had carried in to take the farm from me was, in his own hand, the proof that he had borrowed money against a thing he never owned. I watched it land on him. I watched Dale Hatcher take it in. His Columbus lawyer went very still and lifted his flat hand off the table at last and set it in his lap, and Dale leaned into him and said something low and got nothing back. And then Dale pushed his chair and stood up half out of it and stepped back from that table. One step, the same single step backward the young fellow at the counter had not taken and Marcus Webb had, 2 years and a lifetime apart. Except Dale stepped back from his own signature, away from it, like the paper had warmed under his hand. There was nowhere in that room for him to put his face. I did not feel what I thought I would feel. I had thought there would be some heat in it. There was only a kind of quiet settling, the way a fever breaks and leaves you cold and clear and tired. The judge confirmed the trust as recorded, clean, unbroken, beyond challenge. She found the marriage a matter of plain record, the citation under its seal from the Record Center in St. Louis naming me his widow in the government's own dry language. And she said for the minutes that the court found no fraud in the petitioner's aunt and a good deal of unanswered question in the petitioner. She closed the estate the way Ray had built it to close. It took her 4 minutes. I logged the hour. What came after came on its own steam, and I only heard about most of it. The lender in Columbus, once it understood what its loan had truly been secured against, opened a review, and the review did what those things do. Inside 2 months, there was a notice wired to the gate of Dale's equipment yard out on the county road, and his graders and his rollers stood in a row with lot numbers soaped on their windshields, and the grading and paving outfit that had been sinking quietly for years went down the rest of the way in public, in daylight, where the same town that came to watch me could watch that instead. The dedication went ahead in the spring at the VFW Hall, the one they had threatened to use to call me a fraud. They put Ray's name on the bronze plaque on the wall with the others, Raymond Earl Hatcher, and I stood up in front of those folding chairs with the medal pinned at my collar, the clasp Webb had mended holding it true. And I did not make a speech. I let it be seen. That was enough. That was the whole of it. The thing I keep is smaller than any of that, and it happened at Mercer's. I went in a while after to thank Marcus Webb properly, and the young fellow was still there behind the counter, older around the eyes. A man had come in ahead of me with a service ribbon in a cigar box, his father's, and I watched that young fellow take it up, and before he said one word about its worth, turn it over in his fingers and read the back of it first. Careful, all the way through. Webb caught me watching and gave the smallest nod. He had made it the rule of the counter. The next one who carries a thing like that in across that glass will not be called a liar before someone has read the name on it. I drove home out Blacksmith Road in the long light. The porch was warm and the fields were going gold and gray at the far edge. I unpinned the medal and set it on Ray's flag, folded in its triangle on the table where it lives, and I got the notebook. I clicked the pen and wrote the date in block letters. The clasp closed with a small, clean sound.